And
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this third installment of our summer book reviews. I will be doing today's book review on African American poetry, 250 years of struggle and song. The editor of this particular anthology is Mr. Kevin Young. Yeah, this is a great size to have a discussion on poetry, a nice little intimate size. So there's a couple of things I want to note about the book. If you know the name Henry Louis Gates Jr., he says this as a kind of a praise for the anthology. He says this indispensable anthology will define the Black tradition for a new generation of students and scholars, and for everyone who loves reading good poetry. Its blend of the personal and the political reveals the sublime power of the written word in slavery and freedom to inspire, to protest, and to transcend. So if you love good poetry, you're in the right room. So who's Mr. Kevin Young? So in this wonderful anthology, he's a poet. He submitted a poem to his own anthology, so it's worth reading the biographical note. He was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, was a member of what's known as the Darkroom Collective, and I'll discuss who that is, or what that collective was. He has published 10 books of poetry and has edited several anthologies. Nonfiction includes The Gray Album, On the Blackness of Blackness, and Bunk, The Rise of Hoaxes, Humbug, Plagiarists, Phonies, Postfacts, and Fake News. Was the Charles Howard Candler Professor of English and Creative Writing, and later Atticus Haygood Professor of Creative Writing and English at Emory University. Has also served as curator of literary collections at the university's Raymond Dewowski Poetry Library, elected Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, and is currently the poetry editor at the New Yorker, and director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. He will be the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture starting in January of 2021. Wow. I know. So this book was published, actually very timely, Juneteenth, 2020. It has 246 Black poets, starting in the 1770s through literally 2020. It is 968 pages of poetry. All our poetry lovers, that's a lot of poetry. The biographical notes start on page 971, which means you have all the notes of all the 246 poets that have submitted their work. And there are notes of the poems. There are plenty of references that you don't even know. So we have a wonderful, really robust notes page starting at page 1049 in the back of the book. To note the poetry that he is talking about. So he's speaking about African American poetry in the Americas, and in particular, the majority is found within our country. It's not exhaustive, but it also includes writers from the Caribbean, writers whose first language is not English, and writers whose identities have been excluded, and typically have been excluded in previous anthologies of African American poetry. So you include, there are much more women being published in this anthology, people who identify as LGBTQIA, and more importantly, those that are unable to publish literary works. You'll find that in a good chunk and I'll isolate which portion of the period that he's talking about, that majority of women and male authors weren't able to publish full-length novels for obvious reasons, racial disparity, racial inequities. And so there's a lot of those that have been, either they've had biographical notes, so they come from archives, or they've come from magazines, magazine clippings that just had one or two poems. So this is why this particular anthology is robust, and it's not just simply, let's pick out a bunch of poems from all these published books. It's the entire archival history of Black literature in the Americas from the 1770s. And he divides it into 8 linking sections. And before I get to those sections, because the majority of my discussion will actually be going through each of the 8 sections, he says this: there are particular categories of poems that have been excluded. He said, I have reluctantly excluded the rich Black tradition of verse for young people, as well as folk songs and ballads that have substantially inspired and influenced the formal poetic tradition, including some of the spirituals and blues and hip hop that the writers themselves reference. So there's hardly any spirituals in this particular piece of writing, or any of the works of Tupac Shakur. I would have included him in this title. He had this particular understanding of why he wanted to exclude those particular authors. And so his first section that he talks about, he entitles it "Bury Me in a Free Land." It's from 1770 to 1899. The authors in this particular section in some way encountered or were enslaved people. So we have published in this particular section the first known work of African American literature by an author, Lucy Terry, called Bars Fight. I'll read that to you right now. You also have the first Black woman to ever publish a book while in the Americans. Her name is Phyllis Wheatley. She's very important because her particular corpus really is kind of the start of the Black poetic tradition in the Americas. So a lot of poets throughout the ages will take influence from her style, the content, the themes that she brings out in her work. So her book that was entitled "Poems on the Various Subjects, Religious and Moral" was published in 1773. So the themes that I want to briefly touch on is that are really in this section. So if you're going to read any poetry from 1770 to 1889, the major themes are themes of captivity and freedom, or slavery and immigration. So that's all tied in together as one major theme. The other major theme is that the poetry written is poetry written with the end goal of speech. So this isn't just poetry that is something that I can read, I can enjoy and digest as if it was just another piece of fiction. The intent is to really mimic the oral tradition. As many of these poets in the early 1770s, a lot of the poetic tradition came about as from one generation of folks to the other, passing on poems orally. So that's another emphasis that we'll see in these kinds of poems. And actually, you'll see that really throughout the entire arc of African American poetry. And finally, that poetry is really a collection of kinship. So poets within this era will identify each other, reference each other in poems in a way that says, we may be from different parts of the colonies, but we are just one family, we're one broad community. So you'll hear that. Maybe not necessarily in this, yes, in the second poem I have for you. So let me there's 3 poems I want to read for you from this section that are fantastic. The first one is Lucy Terry's Bars Fight. And it's interesting because this particular poem begins to, in a way, pick up themes that we will later see as you get towards the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, Civil War era poetry. She picks up these themes of fighting for freedom, and remembering the names of those that have gone before us. So this is how it goes. Bars Fight. August was the 25th, 1746. The Indians did in ambush lay some very valiant men to slay, the names of whom I'll not leave out. Samuel Allen was a hero found, and though he was so brave and bold, his face no more shall we behold. Eleazar Hawks was killed outright before he had time to fight. Before he did, the Indian sea was shot and killed immediately. Oliver Anston, he was slain, which caused his friends much grief and pain. Simeon Anston they found dead, and not many rods distant from his head. Adonijah Gillett, do we hear, did lose his life, which was so dear. John Sadler fled across the water, and thus escaped the dreadful slaughter. Eunice Allen did the Indian see coming, and hopes to save himself by running. Had not her petticoat stopped her, the awful creatures had not caught her. Nor Tommy hawked her on her head, and left her on the ground for dead. Young Samuel Allen O'Lackaday was taken and carried to Canada.
What's the first word of the title?
August. Oh, bars.
Bars.
Bars, as in like the bars of soldiers.
Oh.
The bars fight.
Oh,
Yeah, not like the
okay.
bars. It's not drinking. So we see here, this is an excellent example of the oral tradition. These are, as it says, the names of whom I will not leave out. And so what does she do now? She proceeds to name people out loud. It's a naming of the ancestors. It's another important theme all throughout African American literature. And we see it beginning here. And so,
Is she talking about
yes,
white people or black people?
black people, all of the names of these folks are black people. Yeah, so most of these poems will reference just black people, let me be honest.
Where was this? I mean, what colony was, you know?
I don't know. I have to read the back. Yeah. So another one is Phyllis Wheatley, as I said, this first African-American woman to publish a book. I'm reading to S.M. Young, African-American painter, on seeing her works. Scipio was the name of the author. Scipio was the name of the painter, and Scipio was a friend of Phyllis Wheatley. He was also a portraitist. So when Phyllis published her first book, she said, Scipio, I need you to draw a picture of me. I can have it on my book. And so this is really her thanking him for the wonderful depiction. Obviously, if it had been horrible, it would have been a different poem altogether.
Pastor Rodriguez,
Yes,
before you go to the next poem, that names to remember is quite significant, because even as we celebrate Juneteenth now, the local church, I won't say nonprofit, the Center for the Abolishment of Racism has this slogan about all sorts of situations, and then they say his name, and then everybody will either say George Floyd or someone else that's been murdered or unjustly arrested and tortured. But that say his name, it said names we do not remember. They pick that up in their ethos. Thank you.
and we'll see, Bridget, when we get to the 8th section, which is contemporary poetry, so the past 10 years of poetry. One name that's not forgotten is Emmett Till. Emmett Till is a really constant name that's being brought in this kind of last contemporary generation of African-American poets. So yes, let me continue on here. So this is what Phyllis says, that basically said, thank you, Scipio, and look great. It says, to show the laboring bosom's deep intent, and thought in living characters to paint. When first thy pencil did those beauties give, and breathing figures learn from thee to live. How did those prospects give my soul delight, a new creation rushing at thy sight? Still wondrous youth, each noble path pursue, on deathless glories fix thine ardent view. Still may the painters and the poets fire, to aid thy pencil and thy verse conspire. And may the charms of each seraphic theme conduct thy footsteps to immortal fame. High to the blissful wonders of the skies, elate thy soul and raise thy wistful eyes. Thrice happy when exalted to survey that splendid city crowned with endless day, whose twice its gates on radiant hinges ring, celestial Salem blooms in endless spring. Calm and serene thy moments glide along, and may the muse inspire each future song. Still with the sweets of contemplation blessed, may peace with balmy wings your soul invest. And when these shades of time are chased away, and darkness ends in everlasting day, what seraphic pinions shall we move, and view the landscapes in the realms above? There shall thy tongue in heavenly murmurs flow, and there my muse with heavenly transports glow. No more to tell of Damon's tender sighs, no rising radiance of Aurora's eyes. For nobler themes demand a nobler strain, and pure language on the ethereal plane. Cease, gentle muse, the solemn gloom of night now seals the fair creation from my sight. Thanks, Scipio, that was great. You have angelic hands.
But that to me sounds like King James English.
And actually, so Phyllis is a fascinating individual. So she actually also writes a poetry to George Washington. She writes this angelic paean to George Washington. Now we have heard you've taken the cause to be the general of the Continental Army. May you be, and basically the whole poem is saying God is sending you on this way to this noble path, this noble gift that you are giving us here, which is to free us, give us liberty. So she's fascinating. If you ever have a chance to read any of Phyllis Wheatley's book, pick this up or pick up other publication of her work, it just reads like King James English. It's fantastic.
And that's not surprising, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. So the last one I want to read is, and this section is from Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She's not really well known, but she really begins to kind of sharpen the discourse. So she really begins to be a little more firm about what is the question of the slave in America, what's the reality of Black women in the States. And she has this wonderful poem that really, Kevin Young says, kind of encapsulates the whole of this anthology. It's called Songs for the People. She says, let me make songs for the people, songs for the old and the young, songs to stir like battle cry whenever they are sung. Not for the clashing of sabers, nor carnage, nor for strife, but songs to thrill the hearts of men with more abundant life. Let me make songs for the weary amid life's fever and fret, till hearts shall relax their tension and careworn brows forget. Let me sing for little children before their footsteps stray, sweet anthems of love and duty to float over life's highway. I would sing for the poor and the aged, when shadows dim their sight, of the bright and restful mansions where there shall be no night. Our world so worn and weary needs music pure and strong, to hush the jangle and the discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong. Music to soothe all its sorrow, till war and crime shall cease, and hearts of men grow tender, girdle the world with peace. So the next section that Kevin wants to talk about, he calls it Lift Every Voice, and obviously because one of the main authors of the section is James Wendell Johnson, who wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. This emphasis in this section really talks about what is known as the New Negro. So this is something that comes out of the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. It also comes out of the poetic authorship of this time. Like I said, James Wendell Johnson, Fenton Johnson was really considered like the poet of the era, even though we like James Wendell Johnson. The real thrust of this 18 years of poetic history is the Fenton Johnson's African Nights, which I'll talk about. And in this particular period, they're really trying as poets to wrestle with what does it mean to be Black beyond whiteness? What does it mean for us now that we have been free to understand who we are, understand ourselves? And James Wendell Johnson has this wonderful quote that really talks about the whole era of this poetic literature. He says, the final measure of the greatness of all peoples is the amount and the standard of literature and art they have produced. So this whole push in the era is to say, let's get our voices out there. Let's finally describe our experience as is, not as our experience defined over and against kind of the history of whiteness in this country. So I have a couple of poems. They're just, from here on out, folks, there will be so much good poetry here. Not to say the first section wasn't good poetry. This is so many good authors. I only had to whittle it down to what I thought was pretty good. And even then I'm a little dissatisfied, but it's okay. Let's read, actually, Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Wendell Johnson. We'll be singing this later on today.
Hey.
He actually did write this poem with the intent for it to be a song. And it ended up being what people consider the African American anthem, or national anthem. 102. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound as loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on until victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod. Felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee, shallowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. So we hear the emphasis of, we call the new Negro, right? So we have facing the rising sun of our new day begun. So as to say, the past has happened, today is a whole other day. Today we have, and as he says later, not till now we stand at last, right? Now we're not bowed down by slavery. Now we are standing upright. This is who we are. And God is the one who is showing us forward the way that we can continue on in this new path. Yes.
When was this written?
Oh my gosh, I don't have the date on that
Like
one.
within the last 50 years or much older?
Oh, much older. This is
Okay.
the period is from 1900 to 1918.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right, cool.
Yeah. All right, so let me go on to the next one. Angela Weld Grimke, she's the Grimke authors in terms of poetry were kind of not as well known, but there actually is within African American women poetry, the Grimke sisters or the Grimke family is well known. And so it's worth hearing a poem from Angelina Weld Grimke. And the title of which is The Black Finger. I have just seen a most beautiful thing, slim and still against a gold sky, a straight black cypress, sensitive, exquisite, a black finger pointing upward. Why, beautiful still finger, are you black? And why are you pointing upwards? No. Speaks about why are you who you are. And it's what's beautiful is now we start to see, right? This poetry is really about blackness, about the excellence of blackness. Black excellence really is one of the traditions that begins to come out from this poetic era. Beautiful, beautiful poem. And there's another author, and I think I might end on him here, even though I have another one that I like. Fenton Johnson, as I mentioned, he is considered, in terms of the new Negro poetry, he is the pinnacle of this tradition. And he wrote this one, it's selections from African Nights. Because it would be a much larger poem that would not be able to be printed in its fullness. I want to speak about the section entitled Rulers. It is said that many a king in troubled Europe would sell his crown for a day of happiness. I have seen a monarch who held tightly the jewel of happiness on Lombard Street in Philadelphia as evening dropped to earth. I gazed upon a laborer diskier than a sky devoid of moon. He was seated on a throne of flour bags, waving his hand imperiously as two small boys played on their guitars, the ragtime tunes of the day. God's blessing on the monarch who rules on Lombard Street in Philadelphia.
Wow.
And actually, that's a good segue. So ragtime. The next section is a section that is really near and dear to me because the first ever poets I ever read were from the Harlem Renaissance. My favorite poet at the time was Langston Hughes, and I first encountered him in high school. And this theme of ragtime music, right? This is a period from 1919 to 1936. Music and musical forms really begin to inspire the structure of poetry. So we have, at this time, you have the creation of the blues poem, the jazz poem, right? You have all these different kind of allusions to ragtime, allusions to old musical heroes. And really this entire period of Harlem Renaissance poetry really contends with the idea of Africa, right? The idea of this is where our ancestors came from. What does it mean for me? And in particular, Harlem, what does it mean for us as writers in Harlem, in New York City? And so they really are, throughout this entire section, contending with the different ways of understanding Africa. Africa as location, Africa as a spiritual place, Africa as a yearning in my heart. And so with that, and there, again, so many good poets. We have in this era, the first, the birth of the individual could become the first ever African-American to win the Pulitzer Prize. Oh wait, sorry, that's the next one. She's also named. There's two Gwendolyn's in the book. But we really have the first ever African-American woman in this period. Even though she's not really acknowledged, she's one that really begins to create a whole separate corpus of poetry. And her name is Gwendolyn B. Bennett. And I want to start with her before I go to Langston Hughes. She wrote this wonderful poem called Heritage. And I will read just a section of it. It's about three pages long, so I'll just read this part. What is Africa to me? Copper sun or scarlet sea, jungle star or jungle track, strong bronze men or regal black, women from whose loins I sprang when the birds of Eden sang, 3 centuries removed from the scenes his father loved, spicy grove, cinnamon tree. What is Africa to me? So I lie all day long, want no sound except the song sung by wild barbaric birds, goading massive jungle herds, juggernauts of flesh that pass, trampling all tall defiant grass, where young forest lovers lie, plying trough beneath the sky. So I lie, who always hear, though I cram against my ear both my thumbs and keep them there, great drums throbbing through the air. So I lie, whose font of pride, dear distress and joy alike, is my somber flesh and skin, with the dark blood damned within, like great pulsing tides of wine, that I, fear, must burst the fine channels of the chafing net, where they surge and foam pregnant. I really see grappling with what does it mean, her as an African American, right? To realize that we came, right, unjustly to this country. What does that mean? What does my ancestors mean to me? We begin this real strong wrestling with this. And Langston Hughes, right, he actually describes this kind of wrestling in a way that is one of my favorite poems, period. It's called The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And Langston is very interesting because in this poetic anthology, he spans several decades. So he spans this era and the next era, which would basically ends up in 1959. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I have seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. And the last poet I want to bring out, Georgia Douglas Johnson. In this particular period, the Harlem Renaissance, it's kind of, we begin to see a much stronger kind of a focus of, we have these wonderful, great, excellent Black men poets. The women poets tend not to be included up until really about the recent anthologies in this entire era of the Harlem Renaissance. So, like I said, Gwendolyn Bennett, I just referred her to you. Georgia Douglas Johnson is really another one who was not really mentioned in the earlier anthologies of Harlem Renaissance poetry, but she's someone that has since then been recovered. And I'm reading the poem, Black Woman. Don't knock at my door, little child, I cannot let you in. You do not know what a world this is of cruelty and sin. Wait in the still eternity until I come to you. The world is cruel, cruel child, I cannot let you in. Don't knock at my heart, little one. I cannot bear the pain of turning deaf ear to your call time and time again. You do not know the monster men inhabiting the earth. Be still, be still, my precious child. I must not give you birth. So almost parallel to this period, but slightly later, from 1936 to 1959, we have something that's an era not really known well, but it's also called the Chicago Renaissance. We had the Harlem Renaissance, the Chicago Renaissance, and this is all really centered on the Windy City, but it's not really specifically, this is one of those interesting, Harlem Renaissance was really New York City. Chicago Renaissance, it starts in Chicago, but it really encompasses, and we'll see a wider area, which we will also include Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, the Nuyorican in NYC. And this again is, we have the emergence of what is known as the Black Arts Movement. So it's a movement where there's an expanding space of what it means to be Black in a particular place and a location. So it's not just simply we're wrestling with Africa, but what does it mean for me in my particular part of the US, in Alabama or Georgia or in Chicago, or in the case of one of the most famous authors of the period, Julia de Burgos. She is from the Caribbean diaspora. She is someone that was living in New York City, died at 39, and she's someone that wrote primarily in Spanish, and she was Afro-Latina. What does it mean for her to be Black in that particular space? History becomes the focus then. If we're not talking about this nebulous idea of Africa as a symbol, then the question becomes history. So their focus then is the history of art, unique, distinct places in America. So we see here that there's just an explosion of the different kinds of forms that poetry can take. And in particular, these are quite long because if you're focused on history, you're focused on narrative, and if it's a narrative, the poem becomes ballooned out. So I'm really just going to focus on one. Gwendolyn Brooks. She's the one who's the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize. She wrote, "The Chicago Defender sends a man to Little Rock." Chicago Defender sends a man to Little Rock. In Little Rock, the people there babes and comb and part their hair and watch the want ads. Put repair to roof and latch, while wheat toast burns, a woman waters multiverns. Time upholds or overturns the many tight and small concerns. In Little Rock, the people sing Sunday hymns like anything. Through Sunday pomp and polishing and after testament and tunes, some soften Sunday afternoons with lemon tea and Lorna Doones. I forecast and I believe, come Christmas, Little Rock will cleave to Christmas tree and tripe and weave from lap and tinsel texture fat. In Little Rock is baseball, baccarat, that hotness in July. The uniform figures raw and implacable and not intellectual. Batting the hotness or clawing the suffering dust. The open air concert on the special twilight night, when Beethoven is brutal or whispers to a ladylike air. Blanket sitters are solemn as Johann troubles to learn to tell them what to mean. There is love too in Little Rock, soft women softly opening themselves in kindness, or pitying one's blindness, awaiting one's pleasure in azure. Glory with anguished rose at the root, to wash away old semi-discomfitures. They reteach purple and unsullen blues. The whiskey solos go, and uncertain havings have their clarified to shures. In Little Rock, they know not answering the telephone is a way of rejecting life. And that is our business to be bothered, is our business to cherish bores or boredom, be polite to lies and love and many faceted fuzziness. I scratch my head, massage the hate I had. I blink across my prim and penciled pad. The saga I was sent for is not down, because there is a puzzle in this town. The biggest news I do not dare telegraph to the editor's chair. They are like people everywhere. The angry editor would reply in 100 herrings of why. And true, they are hurling spittle rock, garbage and fruit in Little Rock. And I saw a coiling storm arrive on bright Madonnas, and a scythe of men harassing brownish girls, the brows and barrettes and the curls and braids declining away from joy. I saw a bleeding brownish boy, the lariat lynch wished I deplored, the loveliest Lynchy was our poet. So the next period goes from 1959 to 1975. So we have this movement, the Black Arts movement, that really began in this Chicago Renaissance. And this really is like the tradition from which this next period, which Kevin Young entitles Ideas of Ancestry, provides a way for authors of this period to really expand their voices, right? So we have this narrative form. Now they're finding ways that this is a way in which they can express themselves. So in this particular period, as we know, it's a period of much turmoil in the country. We have the civil rights era, right? We have the Anonymous going on. We have the assassination of MLK. We have MLK, the assassination of Malcolm X. This is a period of intense collectivization of groups seeing that their art isn't just simply to really speak truth to us, but it's really a way to move and change society. So this particular period sees that their poetry can be not just read at home, but it can be read alongside workers who are going to bars after a long day of work and using poetry to agitate and to move for transformation. It also is a way in which new kinds of communication, new kinds of printing the word has occurred. So this era is much more influenced by the works of John Coltrane, of Billie Holiday. So you'll hear that in how oral this tradition is. And so this particular era, unlike the other era, is not really interested in history, right? So we had Africa as an idea. The previous era was on history, art histories matter. This era is, it's great, we have the histories, we need change, we need something new now. We need something to happen. So we really see authors like Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Bakara, they all come out in this particular period. So I think from this one, I'll read Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. I think we all know that one. And it's a lovely one to hear here. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dust, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons, like suns, with certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awfully hard, because I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. One of my favorites. And the last poem I want to talk about here, because there's so many good poems of this era. You have authors like Nikki Giovanni is in this era. I like Sonia Sanchez, but I think Audre Lorde, she's one of my favorites. I'm reading her poem, Coal. Is the total black being spoken from the earth's inside? There are many kinds of open. How a diamond comes into a knot of flame, how a sound comes into a word colored by who pays for what is speaking, for what's speaking. Let me begin from the beginning. I missed a word. It's better this way. I Is the total black being spoken from the earth's inside? There are many kinds of open, how a diamond comes into a knot of flame, how a sound comes into a word colored by who pays who pays what for speaking. Some words are open like a diamond on glass windows, singing out within the crash of passing sun. Then there are words like stapled wagers in a perforated book, buy and sign and tear apart, and come whatever wills, all chances the stub remains. An ill-pulled tooth with ragged edge, some words live in my throat, breathing like adders. And others no sun, seeking like gypsies over my tongue, to explode through my lips like some young sparrow bursting from the shell. Some words bedevil me. Love is a word, another kind of open. As a diamond comes into a knot of flame, I am black, because I come from the earth's inside. Take my word for jewel in your open light.
You know, the thing I think of in that era, not necessarily poets, but James Brown saying loud, I'm black and I'm proud, you know, and Muhammad Ali, you know, I'm black and beautiful, you know, that real emphasis on black pride that emerged, you know, and was evident in those poems.
Oh, yes, I agree. And there's, I mean, I could read Short Speech to My Friends by Miri Bakara, Sonia Sanchez, a poem from my brother. It's the same thing. Black pride, proud to be black. So in the next period, from 1976 to 1989, the year I was born, it's again, now it's a focus on history. That the personal history that we have reflects a much broader history that's coming out of society. The sad thing about this era is in the 1980s, all kind of publishing for Black authors dried up. So there's not a lot of Black authors from this period in the 80s. There just wasn't a lot of opportunity. There's one particular author I want to talk about, Rita Dove. She did came out, Odd and Swinging, excellent poet. And I like to read her work from Thomas and Belua. And this particular poem, which I'm just going to read one poem, is really what it is. It's mimicking a set of stories, personal stories that she remembers of her grandparents and parents talking. And so a lot of what you see here is people telling a story, two sides of the story. So this is the event that they're going to be talking about throughout the rest of the poem that I can't really say because it's too long. Ever since they left the Tennessee Ridge with nothing to boast of but good looks and a mandolin, the two Negroes leaning on the rail of a riverboat were inseparable. Lem plucked to Thomas's silver falsetto, but the night was hot and they were drunk. They spat where the wheel churned mud and moonlight, and they called to the tarantulas down among the bananas to come out and dance. You're so fine and mighty, let's see what you can do, said Thomas, pointing to a tree-capped island. Lem stripped, spoke easy. Them's chestnuts, I believe. Dove, quick as a gas. Thomas, dry on deck, saw the green crown shake as the island slipped under, dissolved in the thickening stream at his feet. A stinking circle of rags, the half-shell mandolin, where the wheel turned the water, gently stirred. So that's the first event. Now read some of the titles. So One Volume Missing, Motherhood, Daystar, Canary. These are all subheadings of this one poem from Thomas and Belua. So the next section, from 1990 to 2008, the author calls Praise Songs for the Day. And this is where all these collectives, you heard the word, the Dark Moon Collective, that Kevin Young came from. Collective was it's a group of Boston poets based in Boston, Boston poets. They wanted to figure out how can we honor our ancestors while at the same time take up the themes that we heard from the Black arts era. So what does it mean for me in my particular part of the country to be Black? At the same time honoring what's going on in the past, what happened from Africa, from the history of slavery and Reconstruction, So there's a huge explosion of what we call collections and anthologies. There's another organization that's founded at this time called Cave Canon. It's a poetry nonprofit that still exists today that is a professional development for Black poets. From this particular group, you have huge names that come out. So Natasha Trethewey and Tracy K. Smith, right? The poet laureates of our country. They come from this particular group, this collective. We also see in this era, if you've ever watched HBO, Def Poetry Jam came out. We begin to see that this era is really called kind of like a hip hop poetry era. Hip hop really begins to define the way that poets begin to write about their experience. You also have huge developments for Black poets, right? We have Elizabeth Alexander's Venus Hottentot was read at President Obama's inauguration. We had Maya Angelou's inaugural poem for President Clinton's ceremony in 1993. You have Brooks, right? Gwendolyn Brooks. She has a stint as also a poet laureate. This all happens in this particular era. So we're really in a kind of another edge. You say this is another era of excellent poetic work. And I want to probably read just Tracy K. Smith's work, Sci-Fi. It's pretty funny. I like it. And it really encapsulates this freedom, right? Hip hop aesthetics is whatever's out in the culture, we'll bring it in. Doesn't matter. There's no highbrow or lowbrow. There's everything that's in here that we can make a game out of that. So Sci-Fi is a reason why it's a good poem. Sci-Fi. There will be no edges but curves, clean lines pointing only forward. History with its hard spine and dog-eared corners will be replaced with nuance, just like the dinosaurs gave way to mounds and mounds of ice. Women will still be women, but the distinction will be empty. Sex, having outlived every threat, will gratify only the mind, which is where it will exist. For kicks, we'll dance for ourselves before mirrors studded with golden bulbs. The oldest among us will recognize that glow, but the word sun will have been reassigned to a standard uranium neutralizing device found in households and nursing homes. And yes, we'll live to be much older, thanks to popular consensus. Weightless, unhinged, eons from even our own moon will drift in the haze of space, which we will be once and for all, scrutable and safe. Any lover? And so this last section that I want to leave you on, called After the Hurricane, it is from 2009 to the present day. Many of the poets that are here were a part of this Cave Canon group. So many of them had professional development. Many of these folks don't feel that their lives have to be defined by the history of pain and suffering that their ancestors endured. Here's a good quote from Kevin Young. This coming to the craft already believing there was a Black and distinguished canon seeking no one's acknowledgement of their humanity, has in this youngest generation made a poetry by turns wise and innocent. It is poetry that's also very eclectic and very energetic. And as we mentioned earlier on in the lesson, right, there's still the naming of the ancestors, but it's in a new and different way. So Emmett Till is one of the ones who's regularly mentioned here. And you'll see what I mean by it's kind of like different. So I'm going to read Eve L. Ewing. I saw Emmett Till this week at the grocery store. That is the title of the poem. There is no time to be lost. Other matters must be put aside for the moment and a solution reached for Chicago's greatest problem. Looking over the plums one by one, lifting each to his eyes and turning it slowly, a little earth, checking the smooth skin for pocket marks and rot, or signs of unkind days or people, then sliding them gently into the plastic, whistling softly, reaching with a slim woolen arm into the car. He first balanced them over the wire before realizing the danger of bruising and lifting them back out, cradling them in the nook of his elbow until something harder could take that bottom space. I knew him from his hat. One of those fine pork pie numbers they used to sell on Roosevelt Road. It had lost its feather, but had carefully folded a dollar bill and slid it between the ribbon and felt, and it stood at attention. He wore his money, upright and strong. He was all ready to the checkout by the time I caught up with him. I called out his name, and he spun like a dancer, a candy bar in hand, looked at me quizzically for a moment before remembering my face. He smiled. Well, hello, young lady. Hello, so chilly today. Should have worn my warm coat like you. Yes, so cool for August in Chicago. How are things going for you? Oh, he sighed and put the candy on the belt. It goes, it goes. It goes. Wow. What if Emmett Till would have survived? Wonderful, wonderful.
You know, in your quote, the word innocent was used to describe the poets.
Mhm.
Do you think that's older people saying, be careful? I mean, maybe you're too innocent. In other words, don't forget the past.
I think it's probably that. It's also. On the one hand, yes, I think there's also the idea that yes, there are liberties that are much. We're in a liberty, we're in a sense of a tradition, right? That now extols Black excellence. That's great. Just be careful. Like you can present this, and we have to present this kind of idea of Black excellence. But don't forget, on the flip side, we're still in a society. And so, yes, it's a bit of a just be careful. It may not necessarily be just be careful, remember the past. They'll say, yes, remember the past, but it might be just be careful, remember where you are right now.
This was referred to this era as after the hurricane. Is that specifically related to Katrina?
Yes.
And also as a metaphor for other stuff, the disruption that had occurred in earlier years?
It's a disruption that leads to a different kind of resilience. A lot different. The poetry in this period is a lot different from the other periods, because the kind of resiliency here is this, again, wise and innocent. It's to say, I'm not going to be defined by everybody else. And so if I'm not defined by everybody else, I'm going to continue to develop on from this wellspring of truth that I'm living in. What part of the truth is, you can live like that because there's this whole other tradition that's here. Be careful of this other tradition that warns you that you're still in white spaces. So the last one I want to leave you on that, and I think that might be, I'll answer any other questions. The best poem that exemplifies the kind of playfulness, this tension between being wise and innocent at the same time, is Danny Smith, Dinosaurs in the Hood. It's a really fun reimagining of society and just enjoyment. Let's make a movie called Dinosaurs in the Hood. Jurassic Park meets Friday meets The Pursuit of Happiness. There should be a scene where a little black boy is playing with a toy dinosaur on the bus. Then he looks out the window and sees the T-Rex because there has to be. Don't let Tarantino direct this. In this version, the boy plays with a gun. The metaphor, the black boy toys with their own lives. The foreshadow to his end. The spitting image of his father. The kid has a plastic brontosaurus or a triceratops. And this is the proof of magic or God or Santa. I want a scene where a cop car gets pooped on by a pterodactyl. A scene where the corner store turns into a battleground. Don't let the Wayans brothers in this movie. I don't want any racist stuff about Asian people or overused Latino stereotypes. The movie is about a neighborhood of royal folks. Children of slaves and immigrants and addicts and exile, saving their town from real ass dinosaurs. I don't want some cheesy yet progressive, Hmong, sexy, hot dude hero with a funny yet strong, commanding black girl buddy cop film. This is not a vehicle for Will Smith and Sofia Vergara. I want grandmas on the front porch kicking out raptors with guns. They hid in walls and under mattresses. I want those little spitty screaming dinosaurs. I want Cecily Tyson to make a speech, maybe two. I want Viola Davis to save the day in the last scene with an afro fist, afro pick. Through the last dinosaur's long blood neck, cold-blood neck. But this can't be a black movie. This can't be a black movie. This can't be dismissed because of its cast or its audience. This movie can't be a metaphor for Black people and extinction. This movie can't be about race. This movie can't be about Black pain or cause Black pain. This movie can't be about a long history of having a long history with hurt. This movie can't be about race. Nobody can say the N-word in this movie. Who can't say it to my face in public? No chicken jokes in this movie, no bullet holes in the heroes. No one kills the Black boy, and no one kills the Black boy, and no one kills the Black boy. Besides, the only reason I want to make this is for the first scene anyway. Little Black boy on the bus with his toy dinosaur, his eyes wide and endless, his dreams possible, pulsating, right there. Danny Smith, so that you can see at the end. So there are a lot more powerful poems in this anthology. I commend it to you. Purchase it, read it, learn it, live it, love it. And that's it, folks. That's all they wrote.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, my goodness.
Thanks, Pastor Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
You were saying, Bridget?
It's been wonderful poetry. Those of you who have Michelle Obama's first book, has a portion in it when she has gone to Barack's home village, and she describes her first night under the stars in Africa. And it's as close to poetry as you can get without being called poetry. And my last comment is, I wonder what the African delegation has in mind and what they want to say to Putin when they visit.
He's me. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you all.
Yes, thanks,
And I'll
everyone.
see you next week.
Oh, yes. Thanks, everyone. Who's that? Sharon Ostwald. Oh, she just. Oh, yeah, no, you can, well, see, you can stop your video at any time or mute your, well, I mute everyone. But yeah, Sharon just left us. And so,
Oh, yes.
well, there's no way to, it doesn't lock. No, these don't lock.